The Japanese words hit me before the wine hit the floor. That girl's hot. Let me have a turn later. I understood every syllable. So did Jeffrey Koga. Not the words, but my reaction to them. His voice dropped to something murderous. Gunyo ne Goya. She's mine. The room went silent. Victor Hale smiled, and I knew, with the terrible clarity of someone who'd just been marked, that I'd become the most dangerous piece on a board I'd been desperately trying to stay off. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. The crystal stemware felt cold against my fingertips as I balanced 2 glasses of Chateauneuf du Pape on my tray. 11 months of working at Skyline had taught me exactly how Jeffrey Koga preferred things: precise, elegant, and invisible, especially that last part. I smoothed the front of my black vest and checked my reflection in the polished chrome of the service station. My dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bob, not a strand escaping. Professional, neutral, forgettable. Exactly what I needed to be in a place like this. Skyline occupied the entire top floor of Koga Tower, a glittering spike of glass and steel piercing Seoul's night sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the space, offering views of the city sprawling below in rivers of red and white light. Everything here whispered power. The hand-cut crystal chandeliers dripping light over white linen, the Italian leather chairs that probably cost more than a year of my tuition, the kind of silence that only came from people who controlled what happened in the noise below. Margaret. Minjun appeared in the kitchen doorway, all-controlled menace in his tailored black suit. He was head of security, a man in his late 30s whose polite exterior never quite masked the calculation in his eyes. Mr. Koga will have 3 guests tonight. Service begins at 9. I glanced at the clock. 1 hour. Understood. Minjun hesitated, which sent a cold thread of unease down my spine. In 11 months, I'd never seen him hesitate. These are very important guests, he said carefully. Stay professional, stay quiet, no mistakes tonight. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten, but I simply nodded. I'd learned quickly that Jeffrey Koga didn't entertain often, and when he did, the atmosphere in Skyline changed. Security doubled. The kitchen staff moved with surgical precision. The air itself seemed to sharpen. I wasn't naive about what Jeffrey did for a living. You didn't own a tower in Gangnam, command this kind of fear and respect, or host politicians and CEOs behind closed doors at midnight without connections that existed in blood and shadows. But I'd also learned that asking questions was the fastest way to lose a job that paid enough to keep Elliot's hospital bills from drowning me. By 8:30, the dining room looked impeccable. I'd set the table with the black porcelain Jeffrey preferred for these dinners, each piece positioned with geometric precision. The wine, a vintage I could barely pronounce, sat breathing in a decanter that caught the light like liquid rubies. Each bottle was probably worth more than 3 months of my rent in that cramped office-tel across the river. The first guests arrived just before 9. I stood near the kitchen entrance, hands clasped, gaze lowered, breathing steady. 2 men in dark suits entered first, their conversation cutting off the moment they crossed the threshold. They moved like soldiers, aware of exits, angles, each other. Lieutenants I'd learned to recognize. Men who'd earned their proximity to power through violence. Then Jeffrey appeared from the private elevator, and my traitorous heart did what it always did. Stumbled, caught, resumed beating too fast. He was 34, though he carried himself with the cold authority of someone who'd been making life-and-death decisions since his 20s. Tonight, he wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his black hair styled back to reveal the tattoos that crept up his throat like dark vines. A mark of legacy, of belonging to something older and more ruthless than the gleaming tower around us. His eyes were sharp as obsidian, scanning the room with the precision of a man who saw threats in shadows. He was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, all clean lines and lethal purpose. I'd spent 11 months trying not to notice. Trying not to notice the way his jaw tightened when he was calculating odds, or how his rare smiles transformed his entire face into something almost gentle. Trying not to notice how he positioned himself in every room to see both entrances, how his voice could drop to something soft when speaking to his youngest lieutenant's daughter, how he'd once corrected a drunk businessman who'd snapped his fingers at me like I was a dog. Trying not to notice him at all. "Gentlemen," Jeffrey said, his voice carrying that particular blend of warmth and warning that made dangerous men instinctively straighten. "Thank you for coming." The final guest arrived alone, and the air pressure in the room shifted. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 40, with the polished appearance of European wealth. His suit was Brioni, his cologne expensive enough that I could smell it from across the room, something woody and sharp that made me think of closed boardrooms and backroom deals. Blonde hair swept back, blue eyes cold and assessing, smile pleasant as a shark's. "Victor," Jeffrey said, extending his hand. His tone was perfectly neutral, but I'd learned to read the microscopic tightening around his eyes. This man was not a friend. "Jeffrey, good to see you." Victor Hale's accent was refined, his English flawless, but flavored with something Eastern European. "You have exquisite taste as always." His gaze swept the restaurant, the chandeliers, the view, the table, and landed, for just a fraction too long, on me. I moved forward to take coats and offer drinks, keeping my movements efficient, my expression professionally blank. This was the dance I'd perfected over 11 months, present enough to serve, invisible enough to be dismissed. "What can I get you to drink?" I asked, my voice carefully modulated. The orders came quickly: whiskey for the lieutenants, soju for one, wine for Victor. I moved to the bar station to prepare them, hyper-aware of eyes tracking my movements. Jeffrey positioned himself near the windows, and I noticed, because I always noticed, how he'd placed himself where he could see both the elevator and the kitchen entrance. Strategic. Always. As I served the drinks, Victor's gaze caught on me again. Not the casual glance of someone acknowledging service, something heavier, assessing, proprietary, the kind of look that made my skin prickle with warning. But I kept my expression neutral, my hands steady, and delivered his wine without meeting his eyes. "Shall we sit?" Jeffrey gestured toward the table. I retreated toward the kitchen to coordinate with the chef, giving them space when I heard Victor's voice, lower now, conversational, in a language he clearly assumed I didn't understand. Japanese, slightly accented, but fluent. "이 추위다나, 아노시 kanari hotta. Ato de maeshite kureo." "You have good taste. That girl's hot. Let me have a turn later." My hand tightened on the empty tray. My pulse spiked against my ribs. I understood every word. I'd grown up between American military bases and embassy housing, raised by a Korean mother who'd insisted I learn her language, and an American father stationed in Tokyo who'd made sure I learned his. 3 languages by 12. A survival skill I'd kept carefully hidden the entire time I'd worked here, because invisible girls didn't advertise that they understood every threat, every deal, every confession spoken over wine and blood money. I forced myself to keep moving toward the kitchen, to not react, to not... Jeffrey's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Uskijima. Don't joke." I turned, unable to stop myself. His glass was still in his hand, but his knuckles were white around the stem. His jaw was set, his eyes locked on Victor with something dark and dangerous rising behind them. "Gunyo, Negoya. She's mine." The silence that followed was absolute. Victor's eyebrows rose, amusement sharpening into calculation. The lieutenants exchanged glances. Minjun's hand moved fractionally closer to his jacket, and I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, tray trembling in my hands, heart slamming against my ribs, as every predator in that room turned to reassess me. Not invisible anymore, not safe anymore. In 2 words, spoken in a language he didn't know I understood, Jeffrey Koga had just painted a target on my back. The dinner continued, but the air had changed. Victor's smile never faltered, but it sharpened, became a blade disguised as charm. He leaned back, in his chair, swirling his wine, watching me with the patient focus of a predator that had just identified prey. "So, Jeffrey," he said, switching back to English, "shall we discuss the shipping routes?" I moved through my duties on autopilot, refilling water glasses, clearing the first course, bringing out plates of galbi and banchan arranged like art. My hands were steady, my face professionally blank, but I could feel Victor's gaze following me across the room, measuring, memorizing, as if he were cataloging every detail for later use. Jeffrey had become something else entirely, sharper, colder, more ruthless. He controlled the negotiation with surgical precision, his voice never rising, every word calculated to bury his earlier slip beneath layers of business and veiled threats. But I'd spent 11 months learning to read him, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed once against the table before he caught himself and stopped. He was rattled, and Jeffrey Koga never rattled. The meal stretched for 2 more hours. By the time the guests rose to leave, my nerves were scraped raw. "Pleasure doing business," Victor said at the elevator, shaking Jeffrey's hand. His gaze slid to me one last time. "And please give my compliments to your entire staff." The emphasis landed like a threat. When the elevator doors closed, the silence that remained felt heavy enough to crush bone. "Clear the table," Minjun said quietly, "then wait in the kitchen." The lieutenants left through the private exit. The chef's team filtered out. Within 20 minutes, Skyline was empty except for me, Minjun somewhere in the shadows, and Jeffrey, who'd disappeared into his office without a word. I cleared plates with mechanical efficiency, rehearsing my strategy. "Play dumb. Act like you didn't understand. You're an American girl who barely scraped through college Korean. There's no reason for them to think you speak Japanese." I was stacking wine glasses when Minjun appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Boss wants to see you." My stomach dropped. "Now?" "Now." He led me through the silent restaurant, past the windows where Seoul glittered indifferently below, down a corridor I'd never been allowed in before. We stopped at a door to a private lounge, all dark leather and low lighting, the kind of room where decisions were made that never appeared in boardrooms. Jeffrey stood near the window, jacket discarded over a chair, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The tattoos on his forearms were visible now, intricate, traditional, telling stories I didn't know how to read. He didn't turn when I entered. Minjun closed the door, leaving us alone. "Sit," Jeffrey said. "I'd rather stand." "Sit, Margaret." I sat. He turned then, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. Not angry. Not exactly. Something more complicated, intense and searching, like he was seeing me for the first time and recalculating everything he thought he knew. "Did you understand what Victor said tonight?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost conversational. In Japanese. My throat tightened. "I don't lie to me." Still calm, still quiet, somehow worse than shouting. "I saw your face. Your hand shook. You understood." I could keep denying it, should keep denying it. But something about the way he was looking at me, not as an employee, but as a problem he needed to solve, made the lie stick in my throat. "Yes," I said finally. "I understood." His jaw tightened. "How much Korean do you speak?" "Kung bunhyo," I answered in Korean. "Enough." His eyes widened fractionally. I watched him process it, watched the implications cascade behind his eyes. "Japanese?" he asked in Japanese. "Liu Chang ni," I replied in the same language, fluently. The silence that followed was deafening. Jeffrey moved to the bar cart, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, drank half of it. Then he turned back to me, and I could see the calculations running. Cold, precise, dangerous. How long? He asked in Korean. Since I was a child. You've been here 11 months. His voice had gone very quiet. You've heard everything. It wasn't a question. I kept my head down, I said, switching back to English because it felt safer. I didn't ask questions. I didn't repeat anything. I just wanted to keep my job and, you lied. No one ever asked. The words came out sharper than I intended. You hired me because I served wine well and looked professional in the uniform. You never asked what languages I spoke. You never asked anything about me at all. Something flickered across his face. Acknowledgement, maybe. Or frustration. You understand what this means, he said. Not a question. A test. It means I've been a liability this entire time, I answered. And now Victor knows you care whether someone threatens me, which makes me a bigger liability. It means you're in danger. He set down his glass with controlled precision. Victor Hale doesn't make idle comments. He memorizes weaknesses, exploits them. If he decides you're valuable, I'm not valuable. I'm just a server. You stopped being just a server the moment I opened my mouth. His voice had an edge now, frustration bleeding through. From now on, you don't walk home alone. Min-jun assigns you a driver. You go straight from here to your apartment, nowhere else. I stood, anger flaring. You can't just... I can. I am. He closed the distance between us, and suddenly the room felt too small. You think this is about control? This is about keeping you alive long enough to figure out how much damage I've done. We stood there, the tension crackling between us. Not just boss and employee anymore, but something more complicated, something neither of us knew how to name. Fine, I said quietly, but I keep my job. You keep your job. I turned toward the door. Margaret. I stopped but didn't look back. The languages, he said. Is there anything else you haven't told? Me? My father nearly destroyed your family. My brother is dying. Someone already tried to recruit me once, and I said no because I needed this job more than I needed revenge. No, I lied. Nothing else. After she left, Jeffrey stood at the window, replaying her voice in his head. Korean, flawless and unaccented. Japanese, smooth as a native speaker. 11 months of perfect invisibility, and he'd never suspected. He pulled out his phone and called Min-jun. Look into Margaret Crowley, he said. Everything. Family, education, why she's in Seoul. I want to know who she is before Victor does. You think she's a plant? No. Jeffrey watched her reflection in the window as she crossed the restaurant below, heading for the service elevator. I think she's something worse. Someone with everything to lose and no protection. If Victor figures that out, he'll use her to break me. And if she's already been compromised? Jeffrey's hand tightened on the phone. Then we'll deal with it. But find out first, quietly. I need to know who Margaret Crowley really is. He ended the call and stood alone in the darkness, soul burning bright below, and wondered when exactly the invisible girl with the wine tray had become the most dangerous variable in his carefully controlled world. The office tell was exactly as depressing as I'd left it. A shoebox with a window, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a desk that doubled as a dining table, and a bathroom where I had to stand sideways to close the door. I hung my uniform to dry over the plastic shower rod, watching water drip into the stained basin below. This was what Jeffrey's world looked like from the outside. This was reality. I'd grown up between worlds. American military bases and embassy housing, following my father's postings from Seoul to Tokyo to Manila and back again. Daniel Crowley, the golden boy detective who'd been recruited by Interpol to clean up international organized crime. My mother, the Korean translator who'd loved him enough to leave her family behind. I remembered marble floors in embassy compounds, remembered diplomatic parties where I'd learned to smile politely in 3 languages. Then I remembered the scandal, the accusations of corruption, The way our lives had imploded overnight when my father vanished and my mother's family refused to take us back. That was 7 years ago. A lifetime. I opened my banking app and initiated the transfer. W2,847,000 to Busan General Hospital. Nearly everything I'd made this month, minus rent and the bare minimum for food. The balance that remained made my chest tighten. W340,000. Enough for 2 more weeks if I was careful. 3 new messages from the hospital's billing department. I read them with the numb efficiency of practice, marking the dates for Elliot's next round of medications, the follow-up appointment, the consultation about the experimental procedure that might buy him another year. Might. If I could find the money. My phone buzzed with an incoming video call. Elliot's face filled the screen, 11 years old, too pale, too thin, but smiling like he didn't spend half his life hooked to monitors. Hey, Mags. Hey, kiddo. I forced brightness into my voice. How was physical therapy? Boring, but I beat level 12 on Sky Chasers. He held up his tablet triumphantly. The dragon boss took me like 40 tries. That's my guy. My throat felt tight. Listen, I talked to Dr. Kim about next month's procedure. I know, the expensive one. His smile dimmed. You don't have to. I'll get the money, I said firmly. I always do. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. 11 years old and already learning to carry worry he shouldn't have to. I'd missed his last appointment because of a private dinner at Skyline that ran until 3 a.m. The guilt sat in my stomach like lead. Love you, he said. Love you more. The screen went dark, and I sat alone in my shoebox, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep all the pieces from falling apart. Jeffrey spread the dossier across his desk as dawn broke over Seoul. Crowley, Margaret Ann, age 26. Status, part-time graduate student, international relations, suspended. Employment, Skyline Restaurant, 11 months. Criminal record, none. Financial, regular transfers to Busan General Hospital, pediatric cardiology deputy. Min-jun had been thorough. Bank statements, university records, immigration history, everything legal, everything clean. Almost boring in its normalcy, except for the hospital transfers that consumed 90% of her income. He flipped to the next page. Crowley, Elliot Daniel. Age 11. Relation, brother. Legal guardian, Margaret Crowley. Diagnosis, congenital heart defect, chronic heart failure. Prognosis, poor without intervention. The medical notes were dense with terminology, but the conclusion was clear. The child was dying, and Margaret was bleeding herself dry trying to stop it. Jeffrey's finger traced the line listing her father. Daniel Crowley. Status, missing. 2018. The name meant nothing to him, should it? He made a note to dig deeper, then closed the folder and stared out at the city. Margaret Crowley, invisible server with 3 languages and a dying brother. No wonder she'd perfected the art of being forgotten. No wonder she was desperate enough to keep working in a world that could swallow her whole. Across the city, Victor Hale sat in his hotel suite, watching a young man in server's blacks shift nervously by the door. "You're sure she's the one?" Victor asked in English. "Yes, sir, Margaret Crowley. She's been there almost a year." The junior waiter from Skyline glanced at the envelope of cash on the table. "Mr. Koga never pays attention to any staff, but last night he claimed her in front of witnesses." Victor smiled. "Tell me, does she have family? A boyfriend? Where does she live?" The waiter rattled off an address in Mapogu, mentioned something about her being American, quiet, always working double shifts. Victor slid the envelope across the table. "If you see anything unusual, if Koga changes her schedule, moves her, gives her special treatment, you call me immediately." The waiter grabbed the money and fled. Alone, Victor poured himself a drink and pulled up the photo his man had snapped through Skyline's windows. Margaret in her black vest and white shirt, carrying a wine tray, eyes downcast. Koga has a soft spot, he murmured to himself. How profitable. At Skyline that evening, I felt the weight of eyes everywhere. The other servers whispered near the kitchen, conversations that stopped when I approached. I caught fragments. Boss's girl. Didn't even know she spoke Korean. Wonder what else she's doing for him. My face burned, but I kept my expression neutral and focused on my work. Jeffrey was unusually present, moving through the restaurant during service, positioning himself near tables where I served. When a businessman snapped his fingers at me, "Ya, more soju," Jeffrey materialized beside him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We don't speak to staff that way here," Jeffrey said quietly in Korean. "Apologize." The man paled, stammered an apology. I mumbled thanks and retreated, confused. This wasn't about me. It was about image, about control, about showing everyone he set the rules. It had to be. But when I glanced back, Jeffrey was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. That night, I trudged home under the glow of streetlights, hyper-aware of the black sedan that crawled along 2 car lengths behind. Minjun's driver. My new shadow. I hated it. Hated the lack of control, the reminder that I was no longer invisible. I locked my apartment door, leaned against it, and finally let myself breathe. Outside, 3 stories below, an unmarked sedan with tinted windows idled at the curb. Inside, a man in expensive cologne flipped through photos on his phone. Margaret leaving the building, Margaret at a convenience store, Margaret walking to the subway. He stopped on one, a close-up of her face, caught in profile, unaware. "Pretty little weak spot," he murmured, forwarding the images to Victor. His phone buzzed with a reply. "Keep watching. I want to know everything." He settled deeper into his seat, engine idling, and waited. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay connected. Each story matters. Each story deserves to be remembered, and we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans continents and generations. You are part of something meaningful here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories. Minjun dropped the folder on Jeffrey's desk without preamble. It was older than the first dossier, pages yellowed at the edges, stamped with classifications that had been redacted into black bars. "You're not going to like this," Minjun said. Jeffrey opened it. The first page was a personnel file from Interpol, dated 7 years ago. Crowley, Daniel Joseph. Position, Special Liaison, Organized Crime Division Assignment, Task Force Orion, Sole Operations. Status, missing, presumed dead. Jeffrey's hand stilled on the page. He knew that name. Knew that face staring up at him from the photo. Younger, cleaner cut, burning with the kind of righteous conviction that made men dangerous. "He ran the task force," Jeffrey said slowly, memory sharpening. 2017. "They had surveillance on our shipping routes, informants in the hotels, warrants waiting for signatures. Until he vanished," Minjun finished. "No body, no trace, just a redacted report and rumors." Jeffrey flipped through the pages. Surveillance photos of his father's men, transcripts of wiretaps, handwritten notes in Daniel Crowley's precise script. On one page, circled in red ink, "Koga family, primary target, dismantle from the top down." He remembered the interrogation rooms, the way Crowley had sat across from him with that calm, implacable certainty. "I'm going to bring down every Koga," he'd said, "starting with you." 3 months later, Daniel Crowley disappeared. Jeffrey pulled out the newer dossier, found Elliot's medical records, and compared the names. Father, Daniel J. Crowley. Mother, Yoonmi Sun, deceased. His jaw tightened. Margaret Crowley wasn't just a server with too many secrets. She was the daughter of the man who'd nearly destroyed everything Jeffrey's family had built, the daughter of a ghost who'd once promised to put him in prison. The bitter irony sat in his chest like glass. She'd been serving him wine for 11 months, invisible and silent, while carrying the name of his family's greatest threat. And she'd never said a word. Admiration flickered beneath the anger, because surviving took strength, and Margaret had been surviving alone for 7 years. But the irony was sharper. Daniel Crowley's daughter, desperate enough to work in the heart of the world her father had tried to destroy. "Does she know who we are?" Minjun asked. "She knows exactly who we are," Jeffrey said quietly. "The question is whether she's here for revenge or survival." I was 16 when my father disappeared. I remembered him in the kitchen of our temporary apartment in Itaewon, drinking bitter coffee at midnight, case files spread across the table like entrails. My mother had already gone to bed, exhausted from translating depositions all day. "They're monsters, Maggie," he'd said, not looking up. "They wear expensive suits and eat at restaurants with chandeliers, and they destroy lives like it's business. Someone has to stop them." "And that's you?" I'd asked, teenage and skeptical. "That's me." He'd looked up then, eyes burning with conviction. "I'm going to clean this city up. I promise you that." 3 months later, he was gone. No body, no witnesses, just a call from his supervisor telling us Daniel Crowley was missing, presumed dead, and the case was classified. The embassy flew us back to the States. My mother died 18 months later, cancer, they said. But I knew it was heartbreak. Elliot was 4 years old. I was 17. We had nothing except the truth no one would confirm. My father had gotten too close, and someone had made him disappear. I'd spent 7 years trying not to think about monsters in expensive suits. The email arrived at 2 a.m., when I was lying awake in my narrow bed, watching shadows from passing cars crawl across my ceiling. Sender: unknown. Subject: reunion. I should have deleted it, should have known better than to open anything from an unknown sender. But I was exhausted and lonely, and when I saw the preview, "We know what you've lost," my finger was already tapping the screen. The video loaded slowly, pixelated, and dark. Then I saw him. My father. Older, grayer, thinner, but unmistakably him. Bound to a chair in a concrete room, head drooping, shirt torn. Alive. The video was 15 seconds long. No sound, just Daniel Crowley, breathing, existing, 7 years after the world had declared him dead. The message below was simple: "We can reunite you. All you need to do is cooperate." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. It could be fake. Deepfake technology was good enough now. They could have pulled his photos from old Interpol databases, generated this from nothing. But the scar above his left eyebrow, the way his shoulders slumped, the silver watch I'd given him for his 40th birthday still on his wrist. I couldn't breathe. I forwarded the video to a secret email account I'd created years ago, just in case, then sat staring at the delete button. Cooperate. They didn't need to spell it out. I knew what they wanted. Information. Access. Jeffrey. I deleted the email, cleared my cache, and lay back down, heart hammering against my ribs. Sleep didn't come. The next evening at Skyline, I moved through service like a ghost, poured wine, cleared plates, smiled when required. But my mind kept circling back to that video, to my father's face, to the word cooperate. I found Jeffrey in his office during my break, pretending I needed to confirm tomorrow's schedule. He looked up from his laptop, eyes sharp. "Everything all right?" I opened my mouth to show him the video, to tell him everything, to ask for help. But the words stuck. Because if I told him my father had spent 2 years trying to destroy the Koga family, would Jeffrey still protect me? Or would I become a different kind of liability, one he'd eliminate rather than defend? "If someone had dirt on you," I said instead, voice carefully neutral, "would they ever just let it go?" Jeffrey went very still. "What kind of dirt?" "Hypothetically." There's no such thing as hypothetical in this business, Margaret. He stood, came around the desk. If someone has leverage, they'll use it until you take it away from them. Why are you asking? I forced a shrug. Just thinking about Victor, about what he might do. Jeffrey studied me with that unsettling intensity, like he could read the lie in the spaces between my words. If Victor contacts you, he said slowly, you tell me immediately. Understood? Understood. But we both knew I was lying. Alone in his office after she left, Jeffrey pulled out the old Interpol file and stared at Daniel Crowley's photo. He should tell her, should lay it all out, who her father was, what he tried to do, how the Koga family had been suspected in his disappearance but never charged. But if he told her now, she'd run. Or worse, she'd stay and hate him for every crime her father had tried to punish. He needed more time. Time to figure out whether Margaret was a threat, a victim, or something more complicated. Time to understand why the thought of losing her made his chest feel too tight. He picked up his phone, then set it down again. Not yet. At 3 a.m., I lay awake in my office cell, replaying the video on my secret account. 15 seconds, over and over. My father, alive. Victor's message clear as a knife. Help us break Jeffrey, and you get him back. I thought about Elliot in his hospital bed, about the experimental procedure I couldn't afford, about how quickly everything could be taken away. I thought about Jeffrey saying she's mine in a voice that could have started wars. Then I thought about my father's words from 7 years ago. They're monsters in expensive suits. The line between victim and accomplice had never felt thinner. I closed the video, encrypted the file, and prayed I'd never have to choose. The event was the biggest Skyline had hosted in months. Politicians with practiced smiles, businessmen whose wealth could destabilize currencies, security so thick the air felt compressed. I moved through the crowd on autopilot, balancing trays, pouring wine, my smile professionally fixed even as exhaustion dragged at my bones. I'd been awake for 36 hours, 2 shifts back to back, because another server had called in sick, and I needed the money. Always needed the money. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it, refilling a glass for a man whose face I'd seen on the news. It vibrated again, and again. Between courses, I checked the screen. 3 missed calls from Busan General. My blood turned to ice. I stepped into the kitchen, hands shaking as I called back. The nurse who answered sounded frantic, professional veneer cracking. Miss Crowley, Elliot's gone into acute heart failure. His valve, we need to operate immediately, but we need your consent and... She paused, and I heard the hesitation that meant money. The procedure isn't covered. We need W45,000 up front or we can't... 45 million won. The number hit me like a fist to the chest. $38,000. Money I'd never have. Not in 10 years of working double shifts. Not if I sold everything I owned. How long does he have? My voice sounded distant, someone else's. Ms. Crowley, we need an answer now. I walked back into the dining room without hanging up, the nurse still talking in my ear about consent forms and payment plans and probabilities. The tray in my hand held 6 crystal glasses filled with wine that cost more than I made in a week. My vision blurred. I didn't register the edge of the table, didn't feel my grip loosen until the tray tilted and gravity took over. The crash was spectacular. Crystal exploded across white marble, red wine spreading like arterial blood. The sound cut through conversation, through the careful orchestration of wealth and power, leaving only silence and the sharp scent of alcohol. Everyone stared. I stood frozen in the center of the destruction, phone still pressed to my ear, hearing the nurse say Elliot's name, watching wine crawl toward a politician's expensive shoes like an accusation. Min Jun appeared at my side, hand on my elbow, voice low and lethal. Kitchen. Now. My brother. The words came out broken. He needs surgery. I need to... You need to leave before you cause more damage. Enough! Jeffrey's voice cut across the room, quiet but absolute. He crossed the floor in 4 strides, ignoring the guests, the mess, everything but me. His hand closed around my wrist, gentle but unyielding. "What happened?" he asked. "Elliot." I couldn't get more words out past the fear choking my throat. "Hospital. Surgery. I need to—" He didn't wait for the rest. "Min-jun, clean this up and handle the guests." Then to me. "Come on." He pulled me toward the private elevator, past whispering staff and curious politicians. I stumbled after him, still holding my phone, the nurse's voice tiny and distant. "Miss Crowley, are you there?" Jeffrey drove. I'd never seen him drive before. He always had drivers, security, people to handle mundane things like traffic. But he slid behind the wheel of the armored sedan himself, Min-jun in the passenger seat, and pulled into Seoul's late-night traffic with the focused intensity of someone who'd done this before. "Put it on speaker," he said. I fumbled with my phone. The nurse's voice filled the car, clinical and scared. "Valve replacement. We have a surgeon on standby but without payment authorization." "This is Jeffrey Koga." His voice was steel. "I'm authorizing payment for the procedure, whatever it costs. Connect me to the surgeon." The nurse stammered something about hospital policy. "Now," Jeffrey said. 2 minutes later, a doctor was on the line, explaining risks and percentages and surgical techniques in rapid Korean. Jeffrey listened, asked sharp questions, then said, "Do whatever saves the child. Money is not a concern. I'll have confirmation of funds wired before we arrive." He ended the call and made 3 more, to his bank, to Min-jun's contact at the hospital, to someone else whose name I didn't catch. Every conversation was brief, precise, absolute. I sat in the back seat, shaking, trying to process that this was happening, that Jeffrey Koga was driving me to Busan at midnight to save my brother's life. "Thank you," I whispered. "Save it," he said, eyes on the road. "We're not there yet." Busan General's fluorescent lights turned everything the color of corpses. The surgeon met us in a conference room that smelled like antiseptic and fear. He was older, steady-handed, and spoke with the blunt honesty of someone who'd delivered bad news too many times. "The procedure will cost $47,000 total, possibly more if there are complications. Even with success, recovery will be extensive. There are no guarantees." Margaret made a sound like something breaking. Jeffrey pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke briefly in Korean. Then he turned to the surgeon. "The money's already transferred. Do the surgery." "Mr. Koga, I need the legal guardians—" "I'll sign," I said, the words scraping out. "Whatever you need." But when the paperwork came, when I saw the numbers in black ink, reality crushed down. I'd never be able to repay this. Never. I'd just sold myself into a debt I couldn't comprehend. "Don't," Jeffrey said quietly, reading my face. "Don't argue with the man paying the bill while your brother's on the table." So I signed. And they wheeled Elliot away, pale and small and barely conscious, into an operating room where they'd crack his chest open and try to fix what had been broken since birth. 3 hours later, I found Jeffrey in the waiting area, still in his suit but with his tie loosened and his jacket discarded. He sat in a plastic chair outside the observation window, watching the surgical theater through reinforced glass. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I had a sister once, Ji-won. She was 6 when she got sick. Leukemia. My father spent everything trying to save her. Experimental treatments, specialists from America. It wasn't enough." His voice was flat, but his hands were clenched in his lap. "I was 14, he continued. "I remember sitting in a hospital just like this, watching my father make calls, authorize payments, promise anything if they'd just save her. And I remember thinking that all the power in the world didn't matter when the person you loved was dying." I looked at him, really looked, and saw something raw beneath the careful control. "She didn't make it," he said. I swore I'd never feel that helpless again. Our hands were close on the armrest between us. My fingers brushed his, tentative, and he didn't pull away. "Thank you," I said again, meaning it deeper this time. "Don't thank me yet." Dawn broke over Busan in shades of gray and gold. The surgeon emerged at 6:47 a.m., mask pulled down, exhaustion carved into his face. "The surgery was successful. The valve is holding. But the next 72 hours are critical. If there's infection, if his body rejects—" He paused. "You should prepare yourself." I nodded, numb with relief and terror tangled too tight to separate. Jeffrey's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something changed in his expression, hardened, sharpened into something dangerous. "What?" I asked. He showed me. "Unknown number. Nice of you to pay for the boy. Pity if that investment went to waste." Attached was a photo. Me, walking through the hospital's main entrance 5 hours ago, Jeffrey's hand on my back. The timestamp proved someone had been watching, waiting, documenting. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Victor," Jeffrey said quietly. It wasn't a question. He stood, made a call, voice low and lethal. "Minjun, I need security at Busan General, now. Pediatric ICU, room 407. And find out who took that photo." He ended the call and looked at me with something fierce and protective burning in his eyes. "They know where we are," he said. "Which means we don't leave you or Elliot unguarded. Not for a second." The war Victor had promised had just begun, and my brother was lying in the ICU, too fragile to move, too valuable to ignore. Elliot stabilized on the 3rd day. The doctor's update was cautiously optimistic. The valve was holding, no signs of infection, vitals improving. But then came the list. Immunosuppressants, antibiotics, physical therapy, follow-up surgeries within the year. Each item had a price tag that made my vision blur. "We're looking at ongoing costs of approximately $3,000 monthly," the doctor said, as if that were a reasonable number. "Plus the scheduled procedures." "I'll handle it," Jeffrey said from beside me. The doctor nodded like men made these promises every day and left us alone in the sterile consultation room. I stared at my hands. "I can't repay you." "I'm not asking you to. You spent 47 million won on a child you've never met. There has to be—" "There doesn't." His voice was flat, final. "Your brother needed surgery. I paid for it. That's the end of the transaction." But we both knew it wasn't. Debts in Jeffrey's world were never simple, even when he claimed they didn't exist. Back in Seoul, I'd been at Skyline for less than an hour when Minjun appeared. "Boss wants to see you." Jeffrey stood at his office window, silhouetted against the city. He didn't turn when I entered. "Close the door." I did. The click felt ominous. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. The photo from the hospital, me walking through the entrance, his hand at my back. The message, "Pity if that investment went to waste." "There were 3 more," he said. "One of you in the cafeteria, one of the ICU entrance, one of Elliot's room number on the directory." My stomach dropped. "Victor has eyes on you," Jeffrey continued. "On your brother. He knows where Elliot is, how vulnerable he is, exactly how much leverage he has." He finally turned to face me. "Living alone is no longer an option." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting. You're moving into my private floor, tonight." "Excuse me?" "You heard me." I laughed, sharp, disbelieving. "I can't just move. Into your penthouse. Do you understand what that looks like? What people will think?" "I don't care what people think." "Well, I do." Heat flooded my face. "I'm already the boss's girl to half the staff. If I move in with you—" "You'll be alive," he interrupted. "Victor is escalating. The next photo won't be surveillance. It'll be proof he can reach you whenever he wants. Your office tell has no security, one exit, and neighbors who don't look twice at strange cars. His voice dropped. I can't protect you there. So this is about protection. This is about operational control, he said. But something flickered in his eyes that contradicted the clinical phrasing. You'll still work. Your brother's care continues. I just need you where my men can actually keep you alive. I wanted to argue, wanted to cling to what little independence I had left, but I thought about Elliot in that hospital bed, about Victor's men watching, about the video of my father that still haunted my dreams. How long? I asked quietly. Until Victor is handled. And if that takes months? Then it takes months. He moved closer. Margaret, I'm not asking. The private floor was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd expected opulence, gold fixtures, excessive art, the kind of wealth that screamed its own importance. Instead, it was minimalist and precise. Clean lines, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows that turned soul into a living painting. Everything chosen with purpose, nothing wasted. Guest suite is through there, Jeffrey said, gesturing to a door off the main living area. Bathrooms stocked, closets empty. We'll have your things brought over tomorrow. I stepped into the room and felt my breath catch. It was larger than my entire office tell. A king bed with white linens, a sitting area, windows that overlooked the city from 43 stories up. The bathroom had a soaking tub and heated floors. This is... I couldn't finish the sentence. Temporary, Jeffrey said from the doorway. Until you're safe. But standing in that beautiful, expensive space, I felt the walls of my old life collapse completely. There was no going back from this. No pretending I was just a server who happened to work for a dangerous man. I was in his world now, living in it, breathing it. The first morning, I woke disoriented. Too soft, too quiet, too much light. I found Jeffrey in the kitchen at 6 a.m., already dressed in a suit, making coffee with the mechanical precision of routine. He looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across his face, as if he'd forgotten I was there. Coffee? He offered. Please. We sat at the island in uncomfortable silence, drinking expensive coffee and watching dawn break over Seoul. I noticed details I'd never seen in the restaurant, the way he held his cup with both hands, the faint scar on his knuckles, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. Do you sleep? I asked. Occasionally, a hint of dark humor. You? Not much lately. He nodded like he understood, and maybe he did. We were both carrying weight that made rest feel like a luxury we couldn't afford. There are rules, he said finally. Minjun or another guard escorts you anywhere outside this building. You tell me if anyone contacts you. Anyone. You don't open the door unless you know who's on the other side. Anything else? Don't go onto the balcony after dark. Sniper sight lines. The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. In a hotel suite across the city, Victor Hale reviewed the latest reports with satisfaction. Koga moved her into his penthouse, his lieutenant reported. Happened last night. Building security confirmed it. Victor smiled into his whiskey. How sweet. He's keeping his little bird in a gilded cage. Should we make a move? Not yet. Victor traced the rim of his glass. Let him get comfortable. Let him think he can protect her. The more he invests, the more it'll cost him when we take her away. He pulled up the hospital photos on his tablet, lingering on one of Jeffrey's hand at Margaret's back. Good, he murmured. The more he cares, the harder he'll break. 3 nights in, I woke at 2 a.m. to find Jeffrey's side of the penthouse dark. I wrapped a robe around myself and found him on the balcony, the one he'd told me to avoid after dark. He stood at the railing in shirt sleeves, tie gone, collar open, smoking a cigarette with the focused attention of someone trying to burn away thoughts. He looked wilder than I'd ever seen him. Dangerous and beautiful and utterly alone. You're breaking your own rules, I said from the doorway. He didn't startle. Can't sleep? Neither can you, apparently. He took another drag, exhaled smoke into the soul night. The city glittered below us like scattered diamonds, indifferent to the messy human dramas playing out in its towers. Margaret. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. If you want to leave this life, say it now. I'll arrange new identities for you and Elliot. Money, protection. You'll disappear, and Victor will never find you. My heart stuttered. And you? I stay. This is my world, but it doesn't have to be yours. I stepped onto the balcony, ignoring the sniper warning, and stood beside him at the railing. What if I don't know what I want anymore? He turned to look at me then, and in his eyes I saw the same confusion I felt. The impossible tangle of gratitude and fear, and something else we were both too careful to name. Then figure it out, he said. But do it fast, because Victor's not going to wait. He crushed out his cigarette and went inside, leaving me alone with the city and the weight of a choice I wasn't ready to make. The drive to Busan had become routine, painful, expensive routine. 2 of Jeffrey's men in the front seat, me in the back. 3 hours of highway silence, broken only by check-in calls to Minjun. I felt like cargo being transported under armed guard, which I suppose I was. Valuable cargo that someone wanted to steal. The guilt sat heavy in my chest. Every trip cost money, fuel, man-hours, security risk. Jeffrey was hemorrhaging resources to keep me and Elliot safe, and I had nothing to offer in return except the languages I spoke and secrets I was still keeping. Elliot looked better each day, color returning to his cheeks, strength to his voice. He sat propped up in bed, tablet in hand, arguing with me about which anime character would win in a fight. I'm just saying, if Zorro had his swords... Elliot, we've been over this. He grinned, and for a moment he looked like a normal 11-year-old instead of a child who'd spent half his life in hospitals. So, he said, tone shifting to something sly. The guy who paid for the surgery. Jeffrey? My face heated. What about him? Is he your boyfriend? No, he's my boss. Bosses don't usually pay 40 million won for their employees' brothers. Elliot's gaze was too knowing for his age. The nurses talk, Mags. They think it's romantic. It's not romantic, it's complicated. That's what people say when it's romantic, but they don't want to admit it. I threw a grape at him. He caught it, laughing, and I felt the weight lift fractionally. This, Elliot alive, joking, healing, was worth everything, even the debt I couldn't repay. The vending machine hummed in the empty alcove near the ICU family lounge. It was nearly 9 p.m., visiting hours winding down, the hallways quiet except for the distant beep of monitors and soft-soled shoes on linoleum. I fed coins into the slot, punching the button for coffee that would be terrible but hot. Margaret Crowley. I spun around. The man was mid-40s, expensively dressed in a wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His English was flawless, his smile pleasant, his eyes flat and calculating. I'm sorry, I said, hand moving toward my phone. Do I know you? Not yet. He stepped closer, blocking the exit from the alcove. Not threatening, exactly, but deliberate. But I know quite a bit about you. Margaret Ann Crowley, 26, server at Skyline Restaurant. Legal guardian of Elliot Daniel Crowley, currently recovering from valve replacement surgery in room 407. My pulse spiked. Who are you? A friend. He reached into his coat, slowly, showing he wasn't drawing a weapon, and pulled out his phone. I have something you'll want to see. He turned the screen toward me. The photo was clearer than the video I'd received weeks ago. My father, Daniel Crowley, in the same concrete room but with better lighting, close enough to see the bruises on his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes, the watch on his wrist that I'd given him a lifetime ago. Time-stamped, 2 days ago. He's alive, the man said. Uncomfortable, but alive, for now. My coffee sat forgotten in the machine behind me. What do you want? Simple cooperation. He pocketed his phone and leaned against the wall, casual as if we were discussing weather. Access codes to Skyline's private elevator, details about Jeffrey Koga's shipment schedule, specifically the container route through Incheon next month. Nothing you can't obtain with a little curiosity. You're insane. I'm practical. His smile never wavered. In exchange, your father walks free, and those expensive medications Elliot needs, covered indefinitely. You'll never have to worry about money again. My hands were shaking. I clasped them behind my back, digging nails into palms. And if I refuse? Medical errors happen. He said it so gently. Charts get misplaced. Medications delayed. A child in Elliot's condition, with his compromised immune system, infections can be devastating. The threat landed like a punch. You'd kill an 11-year-old? I'd prefer not to. He straightened, adjusting his coat. But Victor Hale is a businessman, Margaret. He invests in outcomes. If you're not useful, your brother becomes expendable leverage. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in my ears. How long do I have? 72 hours. He produced a business card, blank except for a phone number. Call when you've decided. Oh, and Margaret? Jeffrey Koga's men are very good, but they're not omnipresent. We've been watching you for weeks. If you tell him about this conversation, we'll know, and your brother will suffer for it. He walked away, footsteps echoing down the empty corridor, leaving me frozen in that vending machine alcove with terrible coffee cooling in the dispenser and a blank card burning in my palm. My phone was in my pocket. Recording. I'd started it the moment he said my full name, a reflex from years of not trusting anyone, of always needing proof, of surviving by being smarter than people assumed. 23 minutes of audio, every word, every threat. I stopped the recording with trembling fingers and forwarded it to my encrypted backup account. Then I stood there, staring at the card, mind racing through impossible calculations. I made it back to Elliot's room on autopilot. He was asleep, monitors beeping steadily, IV drip steady, so fragile, so easy to hurt. One of Jeffrey's guards, Sung Ho, stood outside the door. Everything all right, Ms. Crowley? Fine, I lied. Just tired. I sat in the chair beside Elliot's bed and stared at my brother's sleeping face. 11 years old, innocent. Caught in a war he didn't understand because I'd tried to survive by being invisible and had failed. The recording sat in my phone like evidence of my own death sentence. If I gave Victor what he wanted, codes, schedules, intelligence, Jeffrey would be walking into a trap. Men would die. Maybe Jeffrey himself. The man who'd paid for Elliot's surgery, who'd driven through the night, who'd sat in a plastic chair for hours watching my brother through a window because he'd lost his own sister. But if I refused, Victor's man would make good on his threat. Elliot's chart would get lost. His medications delayed. And my father, alive somewhere in a concrete room, would stay in that room until he wasn't alive anymore. I pulled out the recording and listened to it once more, the man's pleasant voice delivering threats like business proposals. In exchange, your father walks free. Charts get misplaced, medications delayed. If you're not useful, your brother becomes expendable leverage. I closed my eyes and felt the walls close in. If I gave them what they wanted, Jeffrey could die. If I didn't, my father, and maybe Elliot, would. I'd thought I understood what it meant to be trapped. But sitting in that hospital room, listening to my brother breathe, holding evidence of a threat I couldn't fight and couldn't escape, I finally understood what Victor had known all along. I wasn't just leverage. I was the battlefield where this war would be won or lost, and everyone I loved would pay the price. The drive back to Seoul stretched endlessly. I sat in the back seat watching highway lights blur past, thumb hovering over the delete button on my phone. The recording sat there like a grenade with the pin half pulled. Evidence. Insurance. Proof that I was exactly the liability Jeffrey had feared. Delete it, one part of me whispered. Pretend it never happened. Figure this out yourself. But the other part, the part that had watched Jeffrey sit vigil outside Elliot's operating room, that had seen something raw and protective in his eyes, that part knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. I forwarded the recording to my encrypted backup one more time, then locked my phone and stared out at the darkness. Jeffrey was waiting when I arrived at the penthouse near midnight. He stood by the windows, drink in hand, still in his shirt and slacks from earlier. He turned when I entered, and his expression shifted immediately. What happened? Nothing. The lie tasted like ash. Margaret. He crossed the room in 3 strides, close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw. You look like you've seen a ghost. What happened in Busan? I said nothing. Don't. His voice sharpened. Don't lie to me. Not now. Not about this. Something in me cracked. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and played the recording. 23 minutes of Victor's lieutenant laying out his deal in that pleasant, murderous voice. Access codes, shipment schedules, my father's life in exchange for Jeffrey's. Jeffrey's expression went glacial as he listened. When the recording ended with the threat against Elliot, charts get misplaced, medications delayed, his hand tightened around his glass hard enough I thought it might shatter. When? He asked, voice lethal quiet. Tonight, vending machines near the ICU. And you're telling me now because? Because I don't know what to do. The words exploded out of me. Because my father is alive, the father who spent 2 years trying to destroy your family. And Victor has him. And they're threatening Elliot if I don't help them kill you. Jeffrey sat down, his glass with controlled precision. Show me the photo. I pulled up the image of my father, that clearer shot that proved he was alive. Jeffrey studied it for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Daniel Crowley, he said finally. Not a question. My stomach dropped. You know. I've known since Minjun's background check. He looked up at me. Your father led the Interpol task force that nearly brought down my family's entire operation. I remember him. Sharp, righteous, convinced we were monsters who needed to be caged. He was right, wasn't he? The words came out bitter. You are monsters. You traffic in violence and corruption. You buy politicians and intimidate witnesses. You... Yes. His bluntness stopped me cold. We are. Your father wasn't wrong about that. Then why are you helping me? My voice broke. Why pay for Elliot? Why protect me? Is this just another transaction? Another way to buy loyalty you can't earn? His eyes flashed. You think I'm trying to buy you? Aren't you? 47,000,001 says you are. The money means nothing. The words came out raw, louder than I'd ever heard him. Money is the only tool I've ever had to fix things. It's what I know. It's what I am. But it doesn't work on you, does it? No amount I spend will make you forget who I am, or what your father tried to do, or the fact that loving me makes you complicit in everything you were raised to hate. The word loving hung between us like a confession neither of us meant to make. I started. I can't think clearly when you're in danger, he interrupted, voice dropping to something almost desperate. I should be calculating odds, managing risk, treating you like the security problem you are. Instead, I'm driving to Busan at midnight and threatening surgeons and moving you into my home because the thought of Victor's men getting near you makes me want to burn his entire operation to the ground. I stared at him, this dangerous man who just admitted to something more frightening than any threat. My father called people like you monsters in suits, I said quietly. He promised me he'd clean up Seoul, make it safe. Then he disappeared and I spent 7 years hating everyone who might have hurt him. I took a shaking breath. But you're the first person since he vanished who's made me feel protected instead of hunted. And I don't know if that makes me a traitor to his memory or just human. Margaret. I closed the distance between us and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question neither of us knew how to ask. But then his hands came up to frame my face, and mine fisted in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and hungry and months overdue. When we finally broke apart, breathless, I could see my own fear and longing reflected in his eyes. "This is a terrible idea," I whispered against his mouth. "The worst," he agreed, and kissed me again. This time it was slower, more thorough, tasting like whiskey and inevitability. His hands slid into my hair. Mine traced the tattoos on his throat I'd spent 11 months trying not to notice. We were a collision of everything we shouldn't want but couldn't stop reaching for. When we finally pulled apart for real, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing hard. "Tomorrow," Jeffrey said, voice rough, "we go on the offensive." "Against Victor?" "Against anyone who thinks you're leverage." His hands tightened on my waist. "I'm done playing defense. We end this before they can use your father or your brother or you against each other." "How?" His smile was dark, dangerous, everything I should fear and somehow didn't. "By making Victor realize that threatening you was the worst mistake he ever made." He kissed me once more, brief, claiming, then stepped back and pulled out his phone. "Minjun, I need a tactical meeting, 1 hour, bring everyone who matters." He paused, listening. "No, this can't wait. Victor just threatened Margaret directly. We're done waiting for him to make the first move." He ended the call and looked at me with something fierce burning in his eyes. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we start a war." I nodded, but sleep felt impossible. Because I'd just crossed a line I could never uncross. Kissed a man my father had spent his career trying to destroy, and chosen a side in a war I'd spent years pretending didn't exist. The recording of Victor's threat sat on my phone like evidence of my own complicity. But Jeffrey's promise, "we go on the offensive," felt like the first real weapon I'd ever held. Tomorrow, we'd stop being victims. Tomorrow, we'd fight back. The tactical meeting happened in Jeffrey's private office at 2 a.m., the city sprawling below us like a battlefield waiting to ignite. Min Jun, 2 lieutenants I recognized from high-level dinners, and Jeffrey's financial strategist, a sharp-eyed woman named Kim, who handled the clean money, gathered around the conference table. I stood near the window, feeling like an intruder until Jeffrey gestured me forward. "She stays," he said when Min Jun's eyebrows rose. "This concerns her directly." I played the recording again. Victor's lieutenant's pleasant voice filled the room, laying out his deal with businesslike precision. When it finished, the silence was heavy. "That's Alexei Volkov," Min Jun said. "Victor's second, ex-FSB, handles wet work and interrogations." "He approached her in a hospital," Jeffrey said, voice flat with controlled rage, "in front of security cameras, in a public space, because he knew we couldn't retaliate without exposing Margaret." "What's the shipment he mentioned?" I asked. "Incheon next month?" Jeffrey and Minjun exchanged glances. "Arms deal," Jeffrey said finally. "Encrypted communications, high-value cargo. If Victor intercepts it, we lose 40 million and 3 years of cultivated contacts." "So we feed him false intel," Kim suggested. "Change the route, let him hit. An empty container." "And Margaret?" Minjun asked, looking at me. "Victor expects a response in 72 hours. When she doesn't deliver—" "She will deliver," Jeffrey interrupted. "Partial codes that look legitimate but route to a monitored system. Shipment details for a decoy route." He turned to me. "Can you sell it? Make Volkov believe you're cooperating out of fear?" I thought about my father in that concrete room, about Elliot's fragile recovery, about the choice I'd already made when I kissed Jeffrey in this penthouse. Yes, I said. I can sell it. Over the next hour, we built the trap. I translated old Japanese messages Jeffrey had stored, but never fully understood. Communications with Yakuza contacts, coded references to payment schedules. My 11 months of silent observation suddenly became valuable. I remembered names dropped at dinners, territorial disputes mentioned over wine, alliances hinted at in languages men assumed I didn't speak. Here, I said, pointing to a message from 6 months ago. This distributor, Tanaka. He's been looking for an excuse to cut ties with Victor. If we approach him first? Jeffrey's expression shifted as he read my translation. You understood this when it was sent? I understood everything. Something flickered in his eyes, realization of just how much intelligence had been walking through his restaurant, invisible and cataloging. How much power I'd been holding without knowing it. You're not just leverage, Minjun said quietly. You're an asset. The word should have felt empowering. Instead, it felt like another cage, different bars but locked just the same. At dawn, my phone rang. Busan General. I answered with my heart in my throat, but the nurse's voice was calm. Ms. Crowley, just checking in. Elliot's vitals are strong. Dr. Park says if he continues improving, we can discuss discharge plans next week. Relief flooded through me. He's really okay? He's doing beautifully. Would you like to speak with him? Elliot came on the line, groggy but cheerful. Mags? The nurse said I might get to leave soon. That's right, kiddo. My throat felt tight. You're getting stronger every day. When you come visit, will you bring Jeffrey? I want to say thank you. I glanced across the penthouse to where Jeffrey stood at the windows, phone pressed to his ear, orchestrating moves in a game Elliot would never understand. Maybe, I said, when this is all over? When what's over? Just some work stuff. Don't worry about it. I tried to sound light. I love you, Elle. Rest up, okay? Love you more. After we hung up, I stood alone in the guest suite and pulled up the video of my father on my phone. That clearer image, time-stamped 2 days ago, proof he was alive and suffering. Would you call me a traitor? I asked his frozen face. For choosing the family you tried to destroy? But I remembered Jeffrey carrying me through hospital doors, sitting vigil outside an operating room for a child he'd never met, offering me exit strategies even when it meant losing his hidden weapon. I remembered his confession. Money is the only tool I've ever had to fix things. My father had been righteous and certain and alone. Jeffrey was dangerous and complicated and somehow present in ways my father never had been. Maybe that made me complicit in everything I was raised to hate. Or maybe it just made me human. I opened my laptop and uploaded the hallway recording to an encrypted cloud service, then sent access credentials to a lawyer in Singapore I'd never met, but whose firm specialized in insurance policies for people in dangerous situations. A dead man's switch. If anything happened to me, if I disappeared, if I stopped checking in weekly, the recording would be released to law enforcement, media, everyone who mattered. Protection against Victor, protection against Jeffrey too, if it came to that. Then I deleted every trace from my phone except 2 photos. Elliot smiling in his hospital bed, and a blurry shot I'd taken of Jeffrey on the balcony at 2 a.m., smoking and looking wild and alone, the evidence of my old life and my new one, side by side. That evening, Skyline opened for another high-profile dinner. I stood by the entrance in my black vest and white shirt, wine list memorized, posture perfect. But everything had changed. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was a weapon hidden in plain sight, a translator, an asset, a woman who'd chosen her side and would live with the consequences. Jeffrey entered from the private elevator in a charcoal suit, tattoos stark against his throat. Every inch the dangerous man who owned this tower and everything in it. Our eyes met for a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. His expression was neutral, professional, but I saw the promise beneath it. I'll keep you safe. I'll burn the world down if I have to. I inclined my head fractionally. A server acknowledging her employer. A partner confirming her role in the game. Minjun appeared at my elbow. Guest list just updated. Victor Hale arrived in Seoul this morning. He's requested a table for tomorrow night. My pulse jumped, but I kept my voice steady. Just Victor, or will Volkov be with him? Both, likely. They want to see how you respond to pressure. Minjun's gaze was sharp. Are you ready for this? I thought about my father in that concrete room, about Elliot recovering in Busan, about Jeffrey's hands in my hair and his confession in the darkness. I thought about the recording sitting in a Singapore server and the choice I'd already made. I'm ready, I said. As guests began arriving and the chandeliers dripped light over white linen, I moved through the restaurant with practiced grace. Invisible again, but only to those who didn't know better. The night Victor called me hot and Jeffrey snapped, "She's mine," I thought I'd just become a target. I didn't realize I'd also become the one thing that could save or destroy us both. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since this started, I wasn't just surviving it.